Welcome to Bluebird Enterprises.
Welcome everyone. Over the past few months, I've been working on building this 2001 Honda Prelude that I kind of impulsively bought a while back. The car looks to be in good condition in this photo, but it was actually in a pretty significant collision. So basically it got T-boned right above the right rear wheel in the quarter panel, and judging from this picture seemed to be somewhat damaged, but after I began kind of cutting into it, some pretty significant body damage was unveiled. So really only a couple minutes with the cutoff wheel on the grinder revealed that someone did a pretty serious Joe doll on it. And utilizing Bondo, foam, wood, and aluminum sheet, they covered up the caving in of the quarter panel, which is just pretty incredible work in my opinion. Like top notch, high quality. So I didn't really screw around and got right to cutting off basically the whole quarter panel, and also noticed some pretty significant damage to the inner wheelhouse as well. And at this point, to be honest, I was kind of in over my head, but I have previous experience repairing some body panels on an old Camaro, so I knew I was capable of removing it and replacing it. So utilizing the cutoff wheel on the grinder, spot weld cutter, chisel, and other hand tools that are used to cut metal away, um, I I removed all the damaged metal and got prepared for a new quarter panel, which at this point I didn't have, but I knew what I needed. So there's this wrecking yard in my area called Gundy's, and I emailed the guy there. His name's Clay, solid dude, and emailed him some photos of what I was working with and what I needed. And for around $300, they hooked me up with basically like a quarter of a car. And as you can see, there's plenty of metal there to patch what I needed. Um, so using the trusty tools, hand tools that I used to take off the damaged one, I got straight to it and removed the wheelhouse and quarter panel from that section from Gundy's, and decided where I'd put the seam roughly, and got it all cleaned up and prepped. And using Cleco fasteners and clamps, I mocked it up before I kind of began tacking and setting the wheelhouse. And it's very important to realize that I used both, or I clamped in the wheelhouse and the quarter panel, and I didn't just put it on the wheelhouse and kind of roughly fit that, because the wheelhouse kind of sets the location of the like wheel arch of the quarter panel. So it's very important that you make sure that the wheelhouse is set, so then the quarter panel gets set in the right spot. So once I was confident that the wheelhouse was going to put the quarter panel in the right location, I went around and welded the wheelhouse in, and then covered those welds up with like some black urethane seam sealer to make sure that elements wouldn't like seep through the seam that I created on the bottom, and it could come through there and then run down and rust out my new quarter panel, and it could also get into the cabin and just do things that you don't want it to, like rust, cause the inside of your car to get wet, etc. So now that the wheelhouse was set in place, I went around, or I made a flange on the B pillar using just like a little bit of sheet metal, and spot welded it in using our spot welder, and then also drilled through the quarter panel. And as you can see in the next set of pictures, or next coming pictures, I like plug welded it and welded on the seam, and then I welded in or filled in all the plug welds that I cut off from the section and that were existing on the other one. And it was cool to see that, like, the section and the actual car, the plug welds are in the same spot, so you basically already had ground down or made a bare metal spot for you to weld in. So, and I also made sure to make this seam like nice and low, so when I got to laying Bondo on it, that I'd have a nice low spot that I could fill in and fair with Bondo. And the reason I put that flange on the B-pillar is because you're kind of creating a weak spot in the panel. So I wanted to make sure there was like a doubler there. So, you know, if you were loading the car up in a corner and the metal wanted to flex there, it's nice and strong and beefy, so it doesn't, you know, the metal doesn't move and then the Bondo cracks or something terrible like that happens. So given that all the welds are basically high spots, you want to make sure to go around and grind them down and make them smooth again, like how it is from the factory. So you can kind of see that transformation here. The left-hand picture, the welds are there, and in the right-hand picture, I'd ground them all down. Basically the ones that you're going to see or are kind of critical, like around the quarter panel window. Like if those were high, then it wouldn't seal, or you'd have to put a ton of sealant in there, and it probably wouldn't seat like you wanted it to. So, and then I also made sure to use some etching primer on the bare metal spots that I had ground. So I can, you know, I think I drove it down in the rain. I didn't want it to rust. It's very important. And I then moved the car down to our other kind of body shop area. And it was so nice to begin sanding on the panel and just realizing that it was nice and flat and, you know, having peace of mind compared to what it was before. And there's just a couple low spots compared, you know, if you were trying to fix the old stuff that was in there, or, you know, continue on the process that the people were doing before, it would have been such a nightmare to try and get the correct shape back. And a new panel was absolutely necessary in my eyes. Same with the wheelhouse, it was all crushed in. So it is kind of unfortunate that I didn't record all that, but the pictures kind of represent the flow of what you do, right? You know, assess the situation. If everything needs to be cut out, cut it out, put in new metal, and then, you know, source some new metal, and then, you know, mock it up, make sure you fit it to the trunk lid, the door, and then once you're happy with it, weld it in, grind the welds down, and then get ready to do some body work. So I do have, you know, video after this point, but hopefully you enjoyed that little montage of pictures that showed what I did. What's going on, everyone? Got a Honda Prelude here. We're doing some body work on it. So, big project. I replaced the quarter panel on this thing. He's gotten a pretty bad accident, as you'll see in the pictures. And we got it on here. We got it all welded in here. Working on filling it with body filler. This is where the seam that we put in was. So we're getting that filled up. And we most likely are going to get a new door, because this one is a little damaged. Looks like the frame kind of got bent. So that's in the works, and I'll show you some of the handiwork that goes into this. Alright, so the idea on here is you're trying to see how this metal showed up. So that's kind of like a high spot is what can happen if you sand too much of the Bondo off. So there's kind of a happy medium here where you have Bondo, so it's kind of faired in. And my dad's really good at working on it and getting it right, but I struggle with it. So we're trying our best, but it's definitely fairing in. And as you can see in some of the pictures that I'll include in this video, so there's a seam in here, you can kind of see, and I put a seam in here where I welded it, and it was, tried to push it in so it was nice and low. So then when you go to Bondo it, it's a low spot and it'll fill in nicely. So that's basically kind of what's going on there. Alright, I'm realizing how fun it is to film things, and I'm really enjoying it, so I hope you guys enjoy my videos. But anyways, this is looking good, and it's kind of hard. There's like this radius, you can see it on this other side. Like this is definitely kind of a focal point on the car, so I feel like if I screwed up on this side, it's not going to be good. So I'm a little stressed out about it, but I'm getting it going. But produces a lot of dust. So if you guys do this at home, I would highly recommend like wearing a respirator, like this one over here. I took it off to grab the camera. And you can use these pads that they have with them. And this is for like dust mainly. And then if you do painting, you want to use something like this, right? This kind of is a finer, I think it has charcoal in it. And you want to be sure to try and protect your lungs because you only got one set, and they're important. Without them, you pretty much die. Yeah, I got to get a taillight. I'm hoping that this fits all right. You can see this is kind of where the quarter panel came in, and then you weld it in there, weld it to the wheelhouse. So I did have my, like, the taillight that came with this car, you know, but it was kind of broken. So I wasn't sure if it was going to fit correctly, but I got to buy a new set of taillights, but that's kind of down the road. It's kind of set where it is, so if it didn't fit, you kind of have to make it fit, so I'm not really that worried about it. So one thing, the wet dry vac is very handy. Like if you start sanding off a bunch of this Bondo, like it can go into there. So if you just kind of turn the vacuum on while you're sanding, you can take a lot of the particulate out of the air. And as you can see, I'll probably use the vacuum on there because if you start blowing it off with the air nozzle, then it goes everywhere. And you're not wearing the respirator all the time, so it can go into your lungs and kind of give you a hard time. So regarding your work table, you know, when I'm working on these cars, one thing I like to do is to stay organized because I feel like if you don't, you can get so spread on bread, and when you need a tool, you'll spend so much time trying to find it. So if you try and stay organized, like just take, 10 minutes to put tools that are similar to each other next to each other, try and get like some consumables organized, and make sure everything is in like a kind of a location. Like set up a table, right? Or lay it, if you have something apart, like lay it out on the ground and make sure that maybe take some pictures when you're taking it apart and make sure you know how it goes back together. Because I feel like a lot of people that work on cars, not a lot of people, but some people, they make the mistake of just taking it apart and they're like, oh, I'll figure it out when I put it back together. And I think it is such a dangerous thing because you might end up putting her back together and you have an extra bolt and you're like, oh shoot, where does this bolt go? And then you're screwed because it's hard to track it down. So before I go back to work, one thing you have to do, in my opinion, like see all these bare metal spots? Like if you're in kind of a more wet environment or a more humid environment, if you don't put primer on it before you, like let's say you go away for a couple days, it will start rusting. And surface rust, you're going to have to try and eliminate it. You do not want rust underneath your paint because it can start, if it rusts, then it can start bubbling even through the Bondo and bubbling through your paint, and then you're basically at square one. So make sure to just clean it off real good and spray. It doesn't have to be a thick coat of primer, just a good enough coat of primer so this bare metal isn't exposed to the air because it oxidizes and starts going back to the earth. I figured the primer time lapse would work as a decent stopping point for this video. So welcome everyone to the Casper build, and look forward to more of these tutorial-esque videos in the future. We're always moving forward here at Bluebird, and I really appreciate you watching and look forward to seeing more of the friendly ghosts soon.